And today, we've been looking at the ways we're seeking to bless and serve and transform our society and God's world through being salt and light. And Kate and her team have been developing this strategy with the Board of Faith and Justice for around 2 years, largely through listening to what's happening across the diocese. So please take your booklet home with you, pass it on to your PCC, take some time to reflect on it together. There will be some more copies arriving in the post for you in the coming weeks. But as we end this day and as it were launch this strategy, I want to take some time to explore for a few moments the Bible passage which gives the booklet its title, Salt and Light. There should be a slide. And I think the next one, please. And indeed the one after that. This is a very familiar passage to all of us, I think. You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. You probably know the passage is taken from the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus has taken his disciples up onto the mountain to think and reflect together. His first gift to them in that sermon is the Beatitudes, the 8 qualities which Jesus sees and wants to see in his church. They're qualities which describe the character of Christ. They are what it means to be a Christ-like church. We're called to be poor in spirit, grieve for the suffering in the world, practice humility, become more hungry and thirsty for justice. We're to be a people characterized by mercy, a people who pursue holiness, who resolve rather than avoid conflict, and a people so distinctive in our discipleship that we will provoke resistance and opposition. And Jesus' second gift to the disciples is this saying about salt and light, which stand then as a headline over everything that follows in the Sermon on the Mount. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Now, these verses sound so simple, but actually they are world-changing. And I think most of us misunderstand what Jesus is saying completely, I think. When we first read that passage, I think our eyes and ears are drawn to those words, salt and light, those images. But those are not the most difficult words to understand in this passage. Salt, an image for all kinds of things. In the Bible, it's an element in sacrifice. It's a preservative, it's a purifier. It brings out taste. It's a symbol for wisdom and purity and peace between people and speech. Salt in the ancient world was rarely pure. It's always mixed with other crystals in its natural form, and so sometimes it could literally lose its flavor. And light, too, is a biblical image, rich image. Light brings knowledge and understanding. Light chases away fear and ignorance. It's associated with truth and warmth and love and radiance and holiness. Light scatters the darkness of unbelief and evil and hate. So we know what those words mean, more or less. The difficult words in the passage are the words, I think, that we think we understand. The first words of each phrase. The words, you are. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. And those are the words we misunderstand here. Just go back one slide, please. Sorry. We misunderstand both of them, but the second more than the first. We hear the first word, most often, you, as a singular. You, Stephen, or you, Jane, or you, Brian, are the salt of the earth and the light of the world. But this is not you singular at all. This is you plural. These are the disciples gathered. This, you see, is another of Jesus' descriptions of the church, the people of God. And it's a very, very important description. The first image of the church in the Gospel of Matthew, which is the gospel that pays most attention to the church. These are pictures of us together being salt and light, not about us as individuals. We all play our part, but no one carries the whole responsibility. This is the calling of our community. You, the church, have a calling beyond yourselves, Jesus is saying. You are something for something. You are the salt of the earth. You bring holiness and seasoning and wisdom and grace. You are the light of the world. You bring love and truth and radiance. William Temple, great Archbishop of Canterbury in the 1940s, William Temple said, "The church is the only organization which exists for the benefit of its non-members. Salt works only when it's scattered through the food, whether bringing taste or preventing decay. Light works only when it's being spread and driving back the darkness. You don't light a city by putting all the streetlights in the same place. You don't light a room by hiding your lamp under a bucket. The church does not exist, Jesus tells us, as an end in itself and in isolation. You, the disciples, you, the church, have a key part to play in God's mission in the earth, to be salt and light." You plural. Next slide, please. But here's the word we have the most difficulty understanding in these phrases. It's the word are. In that phrase, you are. I think we misunderstand what Jesus is telling us here. For most of us hear these words as a challenge or a rebuke or as a calling to be someone else and do something else. But actually, they are a description. They are first and foremost an affirmation of what you, plural, are. What Jesus says is, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. This is a compliment to the disciples. This is praise to the church. This is a description. What we hear is, you ought to be the salt of the earth. You ought to be the light of the world. What Jesus says is, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. What we hear is, I wish you were the salt of the earth. I wish you were the light of the world. But what he says is, you are salt and light. I've checked the original in every possible way, looking for that sense of ought or should, or even could, but it's not there. Jesus is not instructing the church on what we should be. He is telling us what we are, and that's a very different thing. And yes, I know there's a call for the salt to be distinctive, lest it lose its saltiness, and I know there's a call to let the light shine. But those are secondary to the plain, simple, big, holy audacious truth. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Imagine the foolhardy courage in making that statement to that group of disciples in Galilee, far less people than there are in this room today. But imagine, nevertheless, the foolhardy courage in making that statement to a few hundred people gathered in this place now. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Stand tall. Our document is called Salt and Light because the more the team listened to what was happening across the diocese, the more we discovered, of course, that Christians and churches are already doing this, naturally, organically, in the ordinary yet extraordinary fabric of church life. A toddler group here, a lunch club there, an outreach to children, hosting the scout group, turning the buildings outwards, giving to charity, campaigning on any number of issues, founding new trust funds, supporting a school, giving practical help to the homeless. So this is not a strategy which tells you to go and do new things. It's a strategy which affirms and celebrates what you're already doing and what you are. It's a strategy which encourages you to know your place, to be salt and light, to celebrate all that you're doing and reflect on it together. But here's the thing. Why do we find it so very difficult to believe that we are the salt of the earth, the light of the world? Why do we find it so hard to accept the affirmation that Jesus gives us and celebrate what we see? As a church, we often have, and one or two people have said this to me today, we often have a poor self-image. And that poor self-image disables us and disables what we dare to attempt in the name of the Lord. In our own lives and in the life of the church, we often confuse two different things, which look similar but aren't. Two different ways of looking at ourselves. The first is humility. On the one hand, the church needs a proper godly humility. Knowing our place before God, knowing our place before others, not claiming too much for ourselves or being too big for our boots. And we find that humility in our worship and as we study the scriptures and as we're community together. But on the other hand, the church needs to avoid the trap of disabling self-deprecation. Disabling self-deprecation. The loss of confidence in who we are and what Jesus calls us to be. This is a false kind of humility, and it strips away our effectiveness as salt and light. For we need courage as well as humility to fulfill God's mission. The next slide, please. Perhaps you recognize the pictures on the screen. One of my favorite parts of the Lord of the Rings trilogy is the passage where Theoden, king of Rohan, on the right, is set free by Gandalf. Theoden is a once mighty king, only he's been taken prisoner and disabled while he still sits on his throne, not by force, but by soft words and lies whispered by his servant Wormtongue on the left in the picture. Over many years, Wormtongue has whispered in the king's ear that his power has shrunk, that the evil in the land is too strong now, that nothing can be done, that decline of his kingdom is inevitable, that he must save his strength and not exert himself, that resistance is useless, that retreat is the only way. And those soft lies bind the king, and they cut away his strength little by little. With one strand of cotton after another, the mighty warrior is bound by falsehood and wrong ideas. You can't do this. It's too much for you. Evil will prevail. And in the story, it takes Gandalf the White, who's returned from death, to speak the truth, to drive out the evil, and to tell Theoden the king what he is called to be and to do. Well, in the same way, the church in our generation has listened to soft, whispered lies for too long. Everything is in decline. You are too weak now. The evil is too strong. The darkness is so powerful. You are so few, and the need is so great. There aren't enough people. There isn't enough money. No one can make a difference. You couldn't make a difference. It's not worth trying. Well, the lies bind us, and they sap our strength. And it's time to say, enough. Enough. And the one who says that is not me, but Jesus Christ, the head of his church. For he says those words to you, the Church of England in the Diocese of Sheffield, to us, this day, this year, every day, every year. Next slide. You are the salt of the earth. The next one. You are the light of the world. So let the Church of England in this diocese have the courage to see ourselves as Jesus Christ sees us. Let's throw off those chains made from soft lies, and let's take hold of this vision. And in the strength of Christ, encourage one another to live it for the sake of the earth and for the sake of the world. Amen.